You will remember that we were told earlier that fallout not only affects those in the damaged area, but also those who live many miles away, in the country or in other towns. It is about this threat, which no part of the country can count on avoiding, that we are now concerned. It should be appreciated that many places will inevitably have received a great number of evacuees from more vulnerable areas before war starts. This will greatly magnify the problems of all concerned throughout the fallout area, where people will be living in cramped and in many cases uncomfortable conditions. Let us have a look at the situation after the explosion of a high-yield nuclear weapon. Here is the radioactive cloud. The direction of fallout has become apparent. This pattern could stretch 500 to 1,000 miles downwind and be 50 to 100 miles wide according to the strength of the wind. For our purposes, we will assume that it's going to be 60 to 70 miles in width and that its length would reach well out over the coast. Already, the Warning and Monitoring Organization will be predicting the probable fallout area from meteorological information and correcting it as ground readings come in. A grey warning will be issued progressively to the areas threatened by likely fallout. At the ROC posts, they will be watching their radioac instruments for the first indications of its arrival. People throughout the area will complete last-minute preparations, checking their stores of food and water and tuning in wirelesses to the prearranged channel. As the fallout draws nearer, the probable pattern and time of arrival can be predicted with greater certainty. A black warning can therefore be given to the areas affected. They now know at the wardens' posts that fallout is imminent. The public know, too, that they must immediately take refuge and remain there until they are told that they may come out. There is no time to lose. The intensity of the radioactivity will be greatest in the first 48 hours, so it's important that the public stay in refuge for this period. During this time, the emphasis must be on self-help, and the individual household will be the main unit of survival. The warden is no more immune to fallout than the public. Later on, he will be needed for the important work of control and guidance when his area is de-restricted. The public will be prepared to spend 48 hours under cover. The warden must do the same. Before entering the refuge room, it would be advisable for the warden to remove his outer clothing in order to guard against possible contamination of food. It would be wise for him to wash his hands, paying particular attention to the fingernails in order to remove any radioactive particles. Everywhere, there will be the problem of keeping up morale, as there would be no contact with the outside world. At regular intervals, therefore, it is planned to make wireless broadcasts on prearranged wavebands, so that those who turn on their battery-operated wireless sets at the known times can be kept informed of the general situation, and can, if necessary, be given details of any action which they may later have to take for their own safety. We will now assume that the public in the fallout area downwind have spent 48 hours under cover. Let us have a closer look at the map and see what problems there are. Some of these will affect the whole fallout area, but others will only affect certain parts of it. This is because a greater amount of radioactive material will have fallen from the center of the cloud than from its edges. In theory, a pattern like this should result. But with the changing effects of wind and perhaps rain, it's much more likely that it'll be broken up and less regular in outline. For control purposes, it has been proposed to divide the fallout pattern into 4 zones of intensity, called W, X, Y, and Z. Zone W is at the edge of the pattern, and the dose rate in the open here at H plus 48, 48 hours after the burst, will be under 0.3 Roentgen per hour. In Zone X, the rate will be from 0.3 to 3 Roentgen per hour. In Zone Y, from 3 to 10 Roentgen per hour. And in Zone Z, the dose rate will be from 10 Roentgen per hour upwards. Let us take a cross-section of this pattern on the map 60 miles from ground zero and survey the problems which will have to be faced in each zone. The most pressing problem is to be found in Zone Z. Here, the initial dose rate, 48 hours ago, might have been as high as several thousand Roentgen per hour. In the open, this will give a lethal dose in a very short time. Those under good cover will stand a fair chance, but some radiation sickness and death must be expected in this area. However, if the population were to attempt to go on living in the zone, this would be the fate of them all. Therefore, the total clearance of this Z zone must be arranged without delay. Clearance plans will be coordinated from outside the danger area, but those inside will also have a part to play, in particular the wardens and police. The post warden here has just received and passed on a warning order for clearance to his senior wardens, each in charge of a patrol area. The senior warden's first job will be to contact his street leaders by telephone or by runner if necessary, and put into action a prearranged plan for clearance. The dose rate in the open is likely to be 10 Roentgen per hour upwards, so there must be no individual briefing on doorsteps. Then, as we saw earlier, wireless broadcasts on special channels could, within fairly broad limits, give the public advance information on the clearance of their area.
Here is a preliminary announcement regarding public release and clearance. Clearance operations are expected to begin at 10 a.m. tomorrow, Thursday.
Detailed information must, however, be passed by a written message to ensure that all know what is to happen. There are two possible ways of organizing clearance. Either the post warden must wait for a clearance officer, possibly a member of the police force, to arrive, or alternatively, the post warden or his deputy might be summoned in person to the clearance base, set up at a suitable bus or transport depot on the outskirts of a town chosen as an assembly area outside the serious fallout pattern. The clearance officer will check the post warden's plan for clearance with the aid of a street area. The clearance operation is likely to take place in two phases. The first phase will be on a do-it-yourself basis by private cars and by any public transport within the area. And the second phase will be for those relying on public transport brought in from outside the fallout area. In the earlier instance, after his plan has been vetted, the post warden will brief his patrol wardens, who in turn will contact their street leaders and tell them to put the first phase of the plan into operation. Each street leader will consult his list of householders who own transport. They will have to be told when to go and to report to him for the route and destination at that time. It would be stressed how important it would be that every car should carry its maximum load of passengers, and that personal luggage, which should not consist of more than a suitcase or blanket pack, must not reduce passenger space. Each household that has been completely cleared by phase one should leave a prearranged signal to this effect by hanging a sheet or towel from their front windows. Those still awaiting clearance will have been given some idea as to when to be ready to leave. But they must be patient, as the whole process may well take several days from the time at which it is possible to start. While the do-it-yourself phase has been taking place, plans for phase two clearance from outside will have been completed, and convoys of vehicles from clearance bases will have reported to patrol posts in the area to be cleared. Civilian buses and lorries capable of carrying 30 people or more will be used, and in addition, some military transport may be available. This transport will be allocated street by street, and when full, will move off independently. In this way, clearance can proceed without delay. The convoy commander will contact the street leader, and convoy personnel, assisted by the street leader, will call out people from their homes. Again, luggage must be kept to a minimum, and speed in entering the transport is essential. When the convoy commander sees that the street has been cleared, he will enter the last vehicle and leave by the patrol post, reporting the success of the lift to the senior warden, who is himself picked up by the last vehicle to leave the area. Under some circumstances, such as in isolated country communities, small numbers of people may have to be collected from pre-arranged assembly points, in preference to a house-to-house pickup by the clearance unit, so that time is not wasted in the move to the clearance base outside. Here, those who have been cleared from the Z zone might be held for a few hours and given a light meal and elementary documentation before being ferried on further afield by train and coach for billeting. Let us now move a few miles to the west of the area that has just been cleared and see what is happening in this village. The warden here has been told that his area is in Zone Y. The initial radiation dose will have been severe, in the region of 300 to 1,000 Roentgen per hour. Even now, at H plus 48 hours, it is between 3 and 10 Roentgen per hour. But there should not be much sickness if people have been able to get good protection during the first 2 days. Again, the key to survival will have been to remain under cover for the full 48 hours. Only then will the warden be told to start restricted release of his area. He is, of course, as vulnerable as the people to be released, but during his own limited time in the open over the next 12 days, he should attempt to signpost roads leading from his area into the Z zone with boards, so that those in Y zone don't enter greater danger unwittingly. The public in his area must be briefed before they are allowed out of doors. He will probably have to get others to help in this task, so that everyone's dose is kept as low as possible whilst the briefing is done. The briefing and other key jobs will have to be carried out within the time limits of release permitted each day. It may be that the briefing will be done by slips of paper, informing the public that restricted release for not more than 2 hours a day for the first fortnight will be the first stage. This will be followed by release for 4 hours a day over the next 3 weeks, followed by a maximum of 8 hours in the open for the rest of the year, with no control from then on. The briefing slips will also tell them when they can go out and how far they can go around their own neighborhood. With the release of the public from their houses will come the need for resumption of vital public services. The permitted 2 hours a day must be put to good use. Labor shifts in power stations and other key services could be reinforced, and farmers would be able to visit and feed their livestock. Later on, this village will have to rely on supplies of food and water from outside. Supplies will be ferried in as soon as possible and dumped at a central distribution point, such as the local village shop. The local council or water board may be able to help by bringing in supplies of drinking water. But all open water and all growing crops in the fallout area must be assumed to be contaminated until they have been checked by radiac instruments. As far as domestic supplies are concerned, there may be no water available from the taps. It may have been contaminated and cut off, or the waterworks may have been damaged by blast. However, householders should have filled their emergency containers beforehand for such an eventuality. During this first period of restricted release, it is important that the minimum time is spent in the open. If someone has a vital indoor job with one of the essential public services, such as the telephone exchange, he could go off and work a shift to relieve operators who've been pinned down by fallout. Other members of the family, in rotation, might go out on successive days to collect bread and other essential supplies. But it would be advisable to keep the children in. They might be collected in the school if this has a good protective factor against fallout. In general, the longer that those in Zone Y stay under cover during the days that follow release, the better is their chance of avoiding radiation sickness. If we look at the map again, we can see that several miles to the northwest is a new housing estate. The warden here has been told by his control headquarters that his area is in Zone X. The initial dose rate will have been from 30 to 300 Roentgen per hour and is now between 0.3 and 3 Roentgen per hour. The public will have remained under cover for the initial period of at least 48 hours, as in other zones. But after that, there will be greater freedom of release than in Y. Many of the problems in X will be common to Y. The inner boundary of X zone will have to be signposted, the population briefed, and arrangements made for essential shops to reopen. The public will have been told that for the first 5 days, release must be restricted to not more than 4 hours a day. But after that, a maximum of 8 hours a day in the open over the next 3 months is permissible. And after that, complete release. The times of release spent in the open should, however, be kept to an absolute minimum for at least the first 3 months, if people's health is to be preserved. In the absence of rain, it would help if local decontamination of paved areas was started as soon as possible. The amount that can be done depends upon the time factor of exposure, the nature of the surface, and the supply of water available. Fire hydrants and hoses could possibly be used for this, but at the same time, self-help should be encouraged. Householders, when authorized by their warden, might use part of their release time to reduce the radioactivity on hard surfaces around communal cover, and their own homes too, using buckets of water, stirrup pumps and brushes. Remember, half the dose one can receive comes from fallout within 25 feet, so even a bucket of water and a brush can do much to push away this source of radioactivity, provided the washings go down a drain. The rest of the area to the northwest of the housing estate has been graded as Zone W. It will be noticed that the boundaries of this outermost zone are very irregular, and in fact extend to the whole area which received the black warning. Here, the dose rate will be under 0.3 Roentgen per hour before the initial 48 hours is up. The warden looking after this area lives in this small village. He has just received message blue, which tells him that fallout is complete and that no more is threatened from other bombs. He can therefore start the release of his area. He will need to put up warning notices on all roads leading into Zone X, so that people in his area do not stray into zones where restrictions are still necessary. He should also brief his community. They will need to be told that although they are now free to be in the open all day if necessary, entry into the nearby X zone must still be controlled. So, gradually, some semblance of life may return. In the less radioactive zones, this will be achieved quickly. In other zones, which have restricted release over a limited period, this will be a slower business. Discipline will be essential if the system is to succeed. We cannot ignore the hazards of nuclear warfare. Wherever you live, even in the remotest corners of our islands, your life and that of many thousands of people may well depend on your knowledge of this problem and your ability to apply it, so that all may know how to protect themselves from fallout.